These are this is a big deal, really, to understand just what kind of diversity we're looking at. The IIEE are fictional for the characters. The brackets of procedure are mechanics for us.
Right.
And there's qualitative effects too. If you don't know, or let me put it this way, if you don't have to say intent before it's your time to initiate, then every character's action is basically a surprise. You're just waiting to find out what's going to happen when they start to do it. Or you can be much more oriented as to what everybody is doing or looks like they're doing as we start, because intent had been codified or established in some step of its own. So we kind of getting the idea now of how to recognize this. The real problem is that we are obviously cursed with riches here. We're cursed with riches because we have to have some kind of ordered way by which we talk.
Right.
And we have to have some way by which those four fictional things are established per character. Even if it's retroactively, just because we did it in a big wad for a 5-minute combat round.
Right.
We have to have enough understanding that we feel as though the actual fiction has actually done a thing. So we are cursed with riches in that there is no fundamentally unsound way to organize the brackets and relate it to the ordering of talking. There's no, and a character action as well. There is no unsound combo. However, the impact of your combination or arrangement of these things on the experience of play is so profound that it cannot be overstated. It is so profound. So in many ways, you have to attend to this almost more than anything else. And yet, you can't arrive at a conclusion for how to do it in a vacuum. That's why it was so important to talk about what do we mean by character change, whether it's positive growth or development, or whether it's negative, damaging, penalizing, killing, whatever. We have to know what the vision for change in the game is and why that's fun.
Right.
We have to know that before we address how we're going to experience it via the brackets of IIEE in the most complicated situation possible. You will find, because I just realized there is a failure state. Not all IIEE arrangements are equal. All complete ones are equal. But if you hand wave a particular point and say, well, whatever, like-minded people can work that out, then things are wide open to unconstructed play, which permits ego seizing, which basically permits the danger of someone's going to make a decision about it based on how they want things to turn out. And there are certain places where that becomes very obvious. One of the most egregious is lauded as a virtue by some, which is that effect can be subject to change by will of a person at the table. That, that's not the way it should go. It'll go this way instead. I have often found the phrasing of the golden rule to be bluntly dishonest. The phrasing was, and I can pull out my copy if I would needed to. I think I can even find it before anyone called it the golden rule, which is that the storyteller, the name of in that particular text, the storyteller can and should override what I'm calling effect, at will for purposes of enjoyable play, is the way it's phrased.
Yeah.
Now, this is a little interesting. First of all, enjoyable for whom?
Yeah.
Because what if I find it very sucky that my gangrel has just been disemboweled by the NPC Nosferatu, who for some reason is vanishing around the alley and down the sewer before we can catch him again.
Right.
And I say, that sucks. I'm not having fun. That is unenjoyable. I decree that doesn't happen. You try that at a vampire table sometime. For some reason, I'm not good enough. The rule did say the storyteller.
Mhm.
So how is the storyteller to judge whether I'm having enough fun?
Mhm.
One then gets a little mystical and says, well, the good storyteller knows and, assesses the fun at the table and adjusts everything for everyone.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean by the one failure state problem with an arrangement of IIEE? It's when it's not honored. When you do have an arrangement and it's not honored. And this is where rulings over rules takes on its real name, which is bullshit. There are perfectly sound constructions of IIEE which turn over a portion to a designated person's qualitative judgment. That is okay. Don't get me wrong. But do you see what I said? It's actually a formalized step of how we do it that Joe gets to say.
Right.
Done. And in that case, fine. Because that's the rule. That's our routine. That's how we do it. So I'm not coming down on qualitative judgmental impacts as such. What I'm coming down upon it is when it's considered a meta mechanic rather than a mechanic. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it does.
So IIEE is like serious business. This is where so much role-playing game design has relied upon habit, imitation, conformity, and comfort zone. Those are really related concepts. They're not synonymous, but they overlap strongly.
I can definitely see a lot of my own frustrations with some games coming from imitation of the sort of stop motion.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I joke that I'm an initiative role abolitionist because I'm kind of so bored of the stop motion.
Let's go back to another game we've talked about a couple of times, which is using, now again, it's not contrary to popular belief, this is actually something that came into Dungeons & Dragons design well into its history, not originally. But the initiative roll. There, we set the order by rolling the initiative, and we figure that's how it's going to stick for round after round after round, is to go in this order. Let's take that rule. If you look at 4th edition, you will see that it is possible to change up the order. For one thing, you can hold your whole turn and take it to a later step in the current order. That is allowed. And by doing so, you will stay at the new place. You can't go back to where you were. You will also find that you can set up certain actions as triggered. So you can say, okay, I am waiting until such a time as someone sticks his neck out past that corner and I'm on the chop when that happens. That is allowed. So with those two mods, you'll find something interesting. The thinking group of players in that game, they get their initiative. They see where they all stand relative to one another. They look at the situation they're in and what kind of attackers and what kind of perils are going on, and they all quick change up by holding their actions into the optimum order, knowing that they're going to have to take a turn to do this,
right.
staying as defensive as possible while they change it up, possibly moving to support what they may have in mind, so that they can pound in the combo across the players in the order they want later. So there are some games, and I think that's one of them, in which the initiative roll is more of a starting condition that you now have to adapt to and mess with.
Yeah.
Rather than, okay, we are frozen in stone. One of the big things for Champions, which is notorious for its stop motion problem, particularly with movement, because you've got characters zooming along at 70 miles per hour through the through the air.
Yeah.
And that's at the end of phase 5. Then nominally 3 seconds go by before phase 8, which is their next action on speed 5. Their next action's on segment 8. And so 3 seconds have gone by, but by the rules, we kind of pick up right where he was. So what was he doing during those phases?
Right.
How does that work? There are a couple of ways to deal with that if you delve into sort of the second layer of understanding the rules, but they are a little patchy. So this is the curse of hex-based or square-based wargaming, right, where the scale of the troops and whole massive bodies of troops is considered to allow questions like that to be a little slushy. Because the scale at which we're operating, days of troop movements and stuff like that, right, is considered, who cares? Right. But when we're talking about second by section superheroic action combat, it does become a little odd that you look up and there's Speedy Flying Man hanging in the air.
Right.
And then you find patch rules of trying to figure out, zooming straight along, how far would he go in that time? But then you say, but wait a minute, how come he had to spend endurance during his phases to do it, and he doesn't have to spend endurance in the intervening phases to do it? He's getting free movement. So what is that? So as you can see, there are places, role-playing game design has struggled with this multiple times. And as you say, I think correctly, many designs just say, well, the GM will kind of just do patch judgments all the way through. We'll just wriggle it as we go through, and we'll be fine. However, wriggling it as we go through often determines who gets in a key strike and who can get away and stuff like that in those weird interdimensional moments of characters doing, but it's not accounted for by the rules. Right. Many an annoying NPC has escaped a grim death that way. So.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because both the sort of concrete initiative and more advanced forms of initiative, like you described in D&D 4, both kind of suggest to me just going around the table. Not that I want to do that. That's my ultimate design goal, is just going around the table. But initiative, if you do concrete initiative, it always just seems to me eventually you're just kind of going around the table. You're just going in a wonky way.
My solution has almost always been to fold ordering, which is the precise word for what we're talking about.
Right.
To fold ordering into the initiate step of the brackets. And whether that's combined with the first I or not, or combined with the next E or not, doesn't really matter. The point is that we're already conducting mechanics regarding the order. Circle of Hands is kind of interesting because you go into with a fixed order based on quickness, but it is so labile to events
Right.
I mean, you get hit, you go to the back of the order, you can spend some brawn and pump yourself to the front, and it is
Yeah.
intended to be only the character's relative reactivity at the first microsecond. And that's
Right.
it. The order's done after that. It's just all subject to events.
Right.
So that's why there's no rounds in that game. You just always have next.
Right.
So, with that in hand and knowing that it is a primary task, and perhaps the lesson of the moment is consider that the initiation step, the second I, actually is a golden place to fold in your ordering. Maybe that's a good, a good place to kind of take as at least one insight that's relevant for you. Another important insight that I glossed over or mentioned but didn't spend time on was that the execution mechanic may or may not be intimately connected with the effect mechanic. Pretty easy to know the difference. In some games, if you have a 2-hit roll over here and a damage roll over here, and ne'er the twain shall meet, or very rarely, like on a crit or something,
Yeah.
that's one thing. Whereas other games, you have a single mechanic of some kind, which does execution and tells you the effect in the very same act. So we're
And then
very
there's some
close.
that are kind of hybrids where like there's degrees of success where there's a lot of interplay between.
Yes. Now remember though that a lot of that's in games where the execution roll always entails a roll by someone else.
Yeah.
So or a check of some kind on someone
Right.
else. In that case, that's just all in execution. And then if all you have to do is just look at it to get effects, then there you go. Now they're all in one bracket.
Gotcha. Okay.